Okay, the next 4 lessons, starting with lesson 10 that we have here, are all about color correction. These are the kind of the basic color correction lessons, and we use a different project for these next 4 lessons. To do that, we go into our project manager, and we are going to restore an archive. So we're going to choose right click, restore, and just look in our lesson 10s folder. There's gnarly in pink, which is the name of the project, .dra. We're going to open that up, and here it is right here. We'll just double click and open it. Now, you were in the color page before in lesson 9, so you can stay there, but you might want to go up and just come up to workspace and choose to reset the UI layout, just so you're back to a fresh starting point. And what we start with is this lesson is kind of all about your primaries, so color balancing your shot. And we're going to start with clip number 8, which is kind of right in the beginning here. And in clip number 8, we do assume now that you know, the students will know everything about the primary wheels, but this is where we're going to start to introduce a little bit more about the scopes, and we use the parade scope throughout the whole book. So that's the scope that we're going to be used. So you show them where the parade scope is, and you just start to come in and start with kind of the same thing they were doing in lesson 9. You look at the shot and you say it doesn't have a lot of contrast, so you come in and you say let's deal with the master wheel, and let's lower that down to get some shadows in there, and let's increase the gain master wheel to add some brightness in there, and then you show the before and after, however you want to do that. We're going to choose view, bypass all grades, which is Shift D. At this point you can teach them Shift D to do the before and after. So there we've added a lot of contrast. It looks a lot better, but you want to explain to them that just because you've done that, you have no way to quantify what you did. And that's where scope comes in. It really tells you what you're doing and how far you're doing it, how much you're doing it. So if we then turn our attention to the parade scope, and you definitely want to go over and don't assume that people know how to read a parade scope. So you definitely want to tell them about the 0 being black, 1023 being white, and how to read the scope in this trace showing you the red channel, the green channel, and the blue channel. So you want to make sure they understand how to read the trace based on the image that they see there. So to begin with, you say, okay, we made those adjustments. Let's go back to our lift and make sure that they fall, our shadows fall, maybe just above the 0 line, and our gain falls just below the 1023 line. And then you start to talk about color balancing and how in this shot you can see that there's a lot more blue, and if you can't tell that, you can certainly tell it by the scope, and you can talk about how the edges of these, you can see them kind of going up in a line where blue is the strongest signal here in your highlights, and if you're really trying to reach white, these should all be even. So to begin with, what we do is just do the offset, and we just come over to offset, color indicator, and push that warmer until the image looks better. And then they can confirm that on the scope that they all seem pretty even. At this point, you do want to talk about how the viewer isn't color accurate. It's not meant to be color accurate, and you really need a calibrated monitor. Much like you need calibrated speakers for doing audio sweetening, you want a calibrated monitor for doing color critical work. After that, we switch to a new shot, and we use different tools. So we're going to choose clip number 4 for this one, which is the shot of them, a close-up of one of the girls painting her nails. And we switch from the primary wheels to the primary bars. And primary bars are a really nice, simple way you can explain. It does a lot of the same things as the color wheels, but it might be a little bit easier to do color balancing in here because you have very discrete red, green, and blue bars. So if you know something has too much red, you can just go directly to the red, whether it's in lift, gamma, and gain, and then make that adjustment. But you start off the same way. You would come in and you would say, okay, let's look at our lift, and we want to add some shadow in this. Doesn't look quite like it has a lot of contrast, so we're going to lower the shadows. We're going to increase the gain a little bit. But you don't have anything that's white in here, so you really can't color balance it But you can look at the scope and you can see that, your shadows come down, your black point comes down close to the 0 point, but nothing's going to come up way to the top, and you tell them that, to look at your picture, and there's nothing really white in here, so you won't get anything up here. But you do have this nice gray cement here, and we can make the assumption that this gray is a neutral gray. So red, green, and blue should be even in their values, and you can look at the values by right-clicking and show color picker value. And now in this color picker, you can see that if this truly is a neutral gray, which we're making that assumption, then the red, green, and blue should be even, but they're not, so there's a lot less blue. So you could come over to your gamma because it's midtones, and you can boost up the blue, maybe take down the red a little bit, and you can see now they're pretty even. Maybe red's a little bit too high or something, but you can get it there. And you can also look at the scope, and you can see red still looks like it's kind of too high, so we might want to bring that down a little bit. Maybe it has to come down in the highlights. And now we're pretty much even, and it looks pretty even on the scope. Not too bad. You can also do that for the shadows. Like if you hover your pointer over the shadows, you'll get in the shadows, you can see it's pretty even. Might be a little bit too much blue, but just a tiny hair or fraction too much blue, so it's not really even worth adjusting. But you not only can do it in the gray area, you can also do it in your shadows, and if you had any highlights, very bright points, you could do it there as well and make sure. But you have to make sure, like if we do it on our skin, naturally your skin's going to have a lot more red. So you want to make sure it's appropriate. The blacks, there shouldn't be any color in your blacks. And if this is neutral gray, it should be even across the board. So you want to show them that, and then you can turn off your show color picker. And then, of course, at the end of this, what you would want to do is naturally Shift D or come up to your view menu and say bypass all grades. So we'll just do a Shift D, and they can see how red and low contrast it was and how much nicer contrast and more balanced it is now. And that's when you can start talking about primary controls beyond balancing. So we've done a lot of color balancing in lesson 9 and here in this lesson, but now you might want to introduce going a little bit beyond balancing, and to do that you might want to introduce a different node, because this would be our balanced node, but once we're going to create a new look, we would want to introduce a new node. So we're going to come in here and say add serial node. That adds a second node that we can make our style on. So the first one is going to be a color balanced node, and then the second one's going to be where we add our style. So we can label them that way, and you want to show them how to change the label, and this one we'll call balanced, and this one we'll call style. Right, so you can show them how we can label these and keep organized that way. We're going to double click, make sure we're on the style, and now we can say, well, we want this to be more of a sunset look. So I'm going to switch back to my primary wheels. Maybe I'll come to the gain and push that towards a little bit more warmer tone, and now we have a warmer tone in here to give us more of a sunset look. We might come down to our shared adjustments, right, to show them that we can do other things in this shared adjustments. We have we could add a little bit of color boost on page 2 just to get our skin a little bit more colored, and we can come over to our mid-tone detail, but instead of pushing it more, we can subtract it and add a nice little glow to the skin, softening the skin by using a negative mid-tone detail. Now if you want to see what the changes are, instead of doing a before and after to the entire clip, we can just click on the number to say this is it without the style and this is it with the style. So you still get to see the color balance, but you don't have to see the style. You can compare just the style changes, and that's one of the reasons you might use additional nodes. You definitely want to reinforce the reasons for using multiple nodes, not just one. Okay, and now what we change to is kind of the last grade that we do, balance, that we would do in this shot, in this exercise, and that's all the way towards the end. It's clip number 34. And what you would do is you would start with this and just maybe loop it and play it, because you can see it's a very nice shot, but people have the tendency to just click on a thumbnail and start grading on the first frame. And in this case, it might be better to move your playhead into the center. So don't always fall into the trap of color grading the first shot, you might want to, if it's not a representative frame of what the shot actually is. In this case, she's here in the middle and she's nowhere to be found there. So it might be better to have her in the frame when we do this. Now, this shot is a little bit trickier, and you can point out that, yeah, it has a lot of the same problems that the other one had, but it also has the problem of having mixed lighting. It has kind of incandescent lighting, and it has fluorescent lighting, which is giving that green glow on the ceiling. So we'll have to adjust that or fix that later, but to begin with, you start off in the same way, right? But in this case, we're going to introduce another new tool. Instead of using the color wheels or the primaries bars, we're going to use the curve editor. So the custom curves are maybe familiar for people who use Photoshop. We don't go into too much detail on how to really manipulate the curves. We just talk about how this diagonal curve represents the dynamic range of the image, where your shadows are down here, your highlights are up here, and your midtones are in the middle. But the most important thing that we do when we're color balancing with curves is point out that there is a little control point down in the lower left, which is the equivalent of your master wheel, right, the black point. And there's a control point up in the upper right, which is the equivalent of your master wheel for gain, which is your white point, right? So this is your white point and your black point. And if you want to start dragging them in, so if I look at my parade scope, you can see that nothing is really too dark here, and we definitely have things in that should be pretty dark. So what I'm going to do is come down to this black point and start dragging it in along the bottom until I get pretty close to my zero line, but I still see detail in the image. I still want some detail on these foam, but I don't want it to be so milky as it was before. And do the same thing with the white point. I want this to be a brighter image, so I'm going to drag this all the way, maybe a little bit past that first line. You can see in the scope I'm reaching the top, and you can see it's now much brighter here overall. The other thing that you might want to do is explain to them that you can have adjustments. These adjustments happen on luminance, red, green, or blue. So if I just want to adjust blue, you can see my blue channel here is pretty low. So I can unlink these, click on blue, and now I have a blue curve, and I can say, yep, my blue needs to be bumped up a little bit just to color balance the ceiling mostly, right? Because that's where most of the white is. And you can see as I move it in the image, it starts to look much better. And now I have a really good color balanced image here. You can see it's all pretty much even on the top here. And this is the point where you can start to say, now we can attack the green highlights from the fluorescent lights. And to do that, we're going to add a separate node. We wouldn't do that on the same node. A lot of times what you can think of is when you have a different thought or a different idea for a shot, that's the time for a different node. In this case, our different idea is we need to tackle very specifically the green highlights. So what I'm going to do is add a node. And instead of using the custom curves, I want to adjust the color green, and I want to bring down the saturation on that. So if we think about it, it's going to hue versus sat curve, because I want to pick a green hue and lower the saturation. So I'm going to do that. In this case, in a lot of cases, it can be really helpful also to temporarily boost up the saturation so we can see more clearly what we're dealing with. So I'm going to do that. I'm just going to boost up the saturation all the way, and now the green is much more prevalent and it's going to be easier to pick. So what we can do is just click one or two little areas in the shot that represent the green that you want to remove. Again, that's just like we did in chapter 9 or lesson 9. It's going to add the points, and we're just going to pull down those points to get rid of the green and maybe expand the range of greens that we're going to remove as well. Right? So there, that's looking pretty good. Let's double click on that sat name to reset it. And now you can see we have a much nicer balanced shot. Here it is without the green low saturation removal, and here it is with it. So you can see it takes out a lot of that weird green aspect of it, and we can play that through, and you can see overall it's a much better shot. And you can do Shift D to see the overall change, and that's pretty dramatic before and after. All right, so at this point, what we start to talk about is we've only done one clip at a time, right? Well, there are times when you have, especially in a scene where you have very common shots, probably shot at the same time. Maybe they're in a dialogue scene, they'd be cut back to back, you know, you're just cutting between different cameras. But it's all shot roughly at the same time, the same camera setup, same camera. And that's what we have in this case, where we have 8. If you remember, the first shot that we did has 2 other shots before it, 6 and 7, that also need the same kind of color balance. So we talk about here on clip 8, how would you do that? Well, one way to do it when you have a very simple one node situation is you can just select the node and then come up to edit and choose copy. And then we can go to clip number 7 here, and we can say paste. You can also use the keyboard shortcuts if you want to, but it's just copy and paste. Really easy thing to do. The other thing you can do is select 6, which is something that needs the same color correction, and using your 3-button mouse, so you need to have a 3-button mouse, really helpful in Resolve to have it, and in this case you kind of need it. And if you just click on the clip that you want to take the color correction from, the clip that is selected will get that color correction. So I'm just going to use my middle mouse to click on 08, and now we have a color corrected 06 from that. So that's one way, one of many ways that you can copy a grade from one clip onto others. And now if you played through all of these clips, you should see that, you know, they look very, very similar and they look color balanced. And we can do the same thing if we go back to number 4 here, right? Clip number 4 of this close-up of the girl, we added a little bit more of a look. We not only color balanced it, but we added a look to it as well. And what you can do here is you can save this entire grade as a still in our gallery. So just come over to the image and choose grab still. That's going to grab everything that makes up this shot and save it as a still image. And if we want to apply that, we can actually just select the 2 shots before it because they're very similar. Here we have a close-up, again, of girls with the nails. 3 is the same thing, and then we have 4 that we graded. So if we shift-click on 2 and 3 to select them both, we can right-click over the still gallery and say Apply Grade. And now both of these shots get that same kind of look, and you look at it, and they look very, very similar. Now there are times when you might want to compare shots side by side in the viewer, and 5 is just that type of shot. So we have kind of 2, 3, and 4. These 3 shots are close-ups, and then we have 5, which is the wide shot. You can see them there in the middle. So it should have the same type of look as those close-ups. So what we can do with the still is we can double-click it. And when you double click a still, it makes a split screen, and you can see the little split screen image split up here in the upper left hand corner turns on, and basically it's showing the still image on the right and the active clip, the current clip, on the left here. So we can see how it compares, and especially with the cement, right, because the cement should be the same color. You can see it's way off. So what we can do is we can, you know, absolutely just apply that grade. Right click over and choose Apply Grade. And now you can see here, in these cases, this is where you want to say, in these cases when you're dealing with the viewer, it might be nicer to be able to see a larger viewer. So we can come up to Workspace, Viewer Mode, Enhanced Viewer, which is Option F. It's not going to make it full screen, but it is going to get rid of the node view and the still gallery, so we can see this a little bit better. And you can see we might want to warm this up a little bit more, right? Warm up this one a little bit more. So we could do that. We could come over or make it cooler a little bit because it looks a little bit too warm. You can actually look at the scope and you can see as you move across that on the left is a lot cooler. The blues are taller on the left than they are on the right, so we may want to cool this one down. We just drag it a little bit until you're matching it by eye. You can use the scope. Here you can see here, you know, do we want to make it cooler, warmer? That's looking pretty good right there, looking pretty close. And now when you want to get rid of the wipe, we can just go up to the upper left and click on it, and now we have our shot. Come back up and turn off the enhanced viewer, and we're back to normal. And that is lesson 10 on primary grades. And now the next lesson we'll jump into is lesson 11, and that's going to be on secondaries.